There was a lot of excitement and enthusiasm around that Bucs organization. Not only did they acquire Drew Holiday in the deal, just a really impactful acquisition. This was something that the Bucs knew they had to do. They had to upgrade this team, and then they upgrade. They go get Drew Holiday.
I respect this move for CP3. I think they will be what OKC was last year. It keeps Devin Booker happy. It gives him the floor leader. But I think this is who CP3 is. See, I don't think you'll ever see CP3 just say, hey, I want to take the easy way out. I don't think that's him. I don't think he's cut from that cloth.
Who is the biggest winner? It's the Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers, they won big time in free agency. Rob Pelinka went out and signed free agents like they lost the championship. That's how great of a job he did in free agency.
Well, I think they're doing the right things. You know, they have to put themselves in the position to get the good players. So by getting some help in terms of depth and bench strength, I think that's very important signing for them. To sign him up for a nice long time.
I think they make a lot of sense, to be honest. They're a team on the rise. He would just be a great fit for them in Philly. They need a point guard, obviously, with that team.
There's a premium on shooting right now, and you see it with those players.
Dumps it off to Booker, who slams it down.
I'm on my job, I'm doing my thing, I'm flexing on you boys, I'll do it again.
I'm self-motivated. Like, I'm always competing, wanting to be better.
Paul Butter!
You know what I mean? Like, I'm me.
Hey, Chris Paul is a Phoenix Sun. Word on the street. Kendrick Perkins is here. Stephen A. Smith, Max Kellerman. I'm Molly Karen Rose. I want to dive right into this. Stephen A., do you think Western teams should be concerned, the top teams in the West, about these new look Suns?
No, not the top teams. I don't feel that way at all. I really am happy for Devin Booker more so than anybody else that CP3 is there, because the one thing that he has desperately needed is an elite point guard to be in the backcourt with himself, because Devin Booker is a star. He's on the verge of superstardom. This brother is something special, and obviously he's the face of the Phoenix Suns franchise. So to have an experienced guard like CP3, who is the quintessential point guard and floor general, one of the elite floor generals this game has ever seen, he's going to be an upgrade to any squad that he shows up on. Make no mistake about it. But when you talk about the big time teams in the Western Conference, primarily we're talking about the Lakers, the Denver Nuggets, of course, the Clippers. I don't see the Phoenix Suns being able to mess with that, regardless of Booker's fall away that helped beat the Los Angeles Clippers during that 8-game regular season run where they ended up winning the final 8 games that they showed up in the bubble. I understand it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. I definitely think this elevates the CP3 acquisition in the Western Conference. But in terms of the big teams having something to be worried about with them collectively, I don't see that happening. I'm a fan of Monty Williams. I thought he did an outstanding job. He's got the franchise pointed in the right direction. That combined with CP3's leadership, his floor generalship, his skill capabilities, along with the stardom that comes along with Devin Booker, Phoenix will be in the postseason. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But it's not like they're all of a sudden a championship contender. I don't view them that way, and that's why I don't view them as being a threat to the top teams, meaning the top 2 or 3 teams in the Western Conference. I don't see that happening.
Pick up Chris Paul from the
Staples Center, but now for the other team. After he chose to sign a 2-year deal with the Lakers in free agency, he called his decision to leave the Clippers, quote, a business decision. Matt Barnes, who made the opposite move from the Lakers to the Clippers in 2012, joining the debate right now. Matt, great to have you with us. Well, there you are. Hope all's going well during these crazy times. Happy to have you. Yeah, of course. Stephen A., I'll start with you. Do you think the Clippers are blowing free agency?
I wouldn't say blowing it. I think that's too strong of a word when they just acquired Serge Ibaka. But I will say this. First of all, Montrezl Harrell needs to stop lying to some degree, or people need to stop lying on him, because we've heard about the friction between him and Paul George and how that led to a lack of appreciation he felt he was receiving from the organization as a whole. Now, either that's the story or there's a whole bunch of people lying on him, because you see those reports all over the place. That's number one. But I look at Serge Ibaka, the acquisition of Serge Ibaka, and I'm certainly not going to say they're blowing it. Here's what I would say. They still need a point guard, and that's no knock against my brother Patrick Beverley. I got love for Patrick Beverley. I think that he's a stout defender. He's an Energizer bunny. He's a professional pest, and I think every lineup needs that. But you also need a quintessential point guard to be an extension of the court on the floor and to really, really run that show for you. And Patrick Beverley is not viewed in that regard, not just by the coaches, but also by his teammate. Kawhi Leonard, from what I was told, wants a point guard and wants a prototypical point guard, essentially. It was supposed to be Rajon Rondo. Max, what happened is that Rajon Rondo thought that he was going to end up going to the Clippers. But the Atlanta Hawks, rather, came up with about almost $10 million more than the Clippers were willing to offer him or could offer him. So as a result of that, Bill Duffy, like any other agent that knows what the hell they're doing, particularly in this day and age, is always going to emphasize to you to take the money because you could always be traded later, but get your money first. That's what they're going to do. And that's the reason why Rajon Rondo is in Atlanta as we speak, because he could always get traded to somebody. But the bottom line is that doesn't mean you'd get the money. Get the money first. That's why Rondo is not with the Clippers. If Rondo was with the Clippers, along with Serge Ibaka, I think free agency would have been a home run for the Clippers. But because that was not what happened, I'm not going to say they're blowing it, but that is something that they need to address.
Well, literally, that's exactly what I was going to say. I thought that we disagreed about this, but apparently we don't. I think they are blowing free agency, and it's not that they're not doing a good job. Serge Ibaka is a great pickup for them. Versatile defender who can stretch the floor to go next to Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. It's a perfect fit, especially when you still have Morris and you have depth and size and defense and shooting. But what they are missing is a floor general to make that offense more cohesive. It's not like station to station, half-court offense. Kawhi Leonard is a lot of things, and he's an above-average passer even at this point in his career for his position. But that's different than being like a point guard. You know, if you're going to run your offense through Kawhi Leonard, that's fine. You can do it. In fact, you can do it to great effect. But to beat the Lakers, you should have a dynamic playmaker who's not Kawhi Leonard, right? So had they, for example, made a move and somehow acquired Drew Holiday, I'd be thinking about the Clippers differently right now. Right now, I know Clippers are kind of the hot pick as the second best team in the West. But as you know, earlier in the show, I like the Mavericks better if they're healthy than the Clippers. I don't think the Clippers have done enough to address the issue, which is Patrick Beverley, who's a nice player, a 3-and-D guy who's short, so he's a point guard, is not a dynamic playmaker. So Rondo, I thought, was heading for the Clippers. Stephen A., you gave information as to why that didn't happen, and he would have been an excellent fit on the Clippers, especially since he's playoff Rondo. But Drew Holiday or someone like that, there were other options that you could have fit onto this team and gone like, wait a minute, the Clippers are a real threat. And I don't feel that way at this moment.
I agree with Stephen A. I can't call it a disaster because you are able to sign Serge Ibaka and you did re-sign the Morris twin. But at the same time, I think we're looking at it from a standpoint of that Lakers are really going out like they fell short last year because their counterpart down the hallway, the Lakers are really active and pursuing and getting who they want. I think it makes the Clippers kind of look like, man, are the Clippers dragging their feet? What's going on? I still think they got some time. Obviously, they have until the trade deadline, but I don't want to beat a dead horse. They need to address the point guard-ish situation there. They need a floor general. It wasn't Rondo. I talked to CP before CP went to Phoenix, and CP, had interest in going back to the Clippers. They didn't want to pull that trigger, so the Clippers need to address the point guard play. And then there was, there is stuff floating around about the chemistry in that locker room last season. So whether Montrez was the blame of it, I'm sure you can't put all of it on it. They decided to part ways with him, but I think number one issue is they need to address that point guard situation and then try to get on the same page. Because I think last year we were waiting for them to hit that chemistry mark last year because we just figured they'd been injured and hadn't got a chance to play together. But there was more behind the scenes that we didn't really know until now.
Well, Matt, it's interesting that you bring that up because a few weeks ago, I talked about the Clippers wanting CP3 or Rondo. Obviously, CP3 would have been the preference, and I also know he's got a great relationship with Ty Lue, and as a result, that had him strongly interested in returning to the Clippers because of the relationship with Ballmer as well, who he still has dinner with a lot of times. But here's the reality. This is what puts the real onus on Kawhi Leonard, in my estimation. And I really want to hear what you think about this, Matt. The Clippers gave up all those assets. It wasn't just to get Kawhi. It's because Kawhi insisted he wanted Paul George. It wasn't enough for him to come to the Clippers. He sat up there and said, if you don't do what it takes to get my man Paul George here with me, I'm going to go to the Lakers and join LeBron and AD. Ballmer couldn't let that happen. So they mortgaged the farm and to get him, which is it's their decision. It's not his fault per se. But because of that, they didn't have the assets necessary to now give Oklahoma City to get CP3. And so not only did you use those assets to acquire Paul George, it prohibited you from having the assets necessary to get CP3. And that's